Always make those above you feel comfortably superior. In your desire to please or impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talent, or you might accomplish the opposite. Inspire fear and insecurity. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the heights of power. In the modern world, where ambition and self-promotion seem like virtues, this ancient wisdom feels almost counterintuitive. Yet its truth echoes through boardrooms, classrooms, and every relationship with a power dynamic. From the gleaming corporate towers of Manhattan to the hallowed halls of academia, from government chambers to creative studios, this principle operates in silence, governing the rise and fall of careers with an invisible hand. This is not a story about deception or manipulation. Rather, it's an exploration of human psychology and the delicate dance of power that all participate in, whether recognized or not. It speaks to the fragile nature of authority and the profound insecurity that often lies beneath its surface. To understand this principle is not to become cynical about human relationships, but to develop a deeper compassion for the complex emotional terrain we all navigate. Brilliance can be both a blessing and a burden. Many have experienced the strange paradox that occurs when excellence creates barriers rather than bridges, when one's light, instead of illuminating a path forward, casts uncomfortable shadows on those in positions of authority. The tragedy lies not in the suppression of talent, but in the misunderstanding of human nature. When we fail to recognize the emotional undercurrents that flow beneath rational discourse, we may inadvertently transform allies into adversaries. It happens everywhere. A new employee brings fresh ideas that inadvertently make a supervisor feel outdated. A student asks questions that unintentionally challenge a teacher's expertise. A team member proposes solutions so complete they leave no room for a manager's input or improvement. In each case, what should be celebrated, innovation, curiosity, thoroughness, instead becomes threatening, not because of any malice, but because of the fundamental human need to feel valued and relevant. Have you ever felt this? The subtle cooling of a relationship after sharing an insight too brilliant, too complete? The shift in energy when someone above you suddenly feels less essential, less masterful in your presence? Perhaps you've witnessed the defensive posture that emerges, the dismissal of your ideas without substantive engagement, the increased scrutiny of your other work, the subtle exclusion from important conversations. These are not rational responses, but emotional ones, arising from the primal fear of obsolescence. This phenomenon is not unique to our time. Throughout history, those who navigated power structures most successfully understood that human relationships are rarely about pure merit. They operate on complex psychological undercurrents where ego, insecurity, and the need for validation play crucial roles. From ancient courts to modern corporations, the landscape of advancement has always been as much emotional as intellectual. Those who rise highest often do so not merely through brilliance, but through psychological acuity, an understanding of when to shine and when to create space for others to feel luminous. Consider the relationship between kings and their advisors throughout history. The most successful counselors were rarely those with the most brilliant ideas, but those who knew how to present their insights in ways that made the ruler feel wise for agreeing with them. They understood that power requires constant affirmation. Cardinal Richelieu, perhaps the most effective advisor in French history, mastered the art of making Louis XIII feel that the cardinal's brilliant strategies originated from the king's own wisdom. Richelieu would present options in such a way that the king would inevitably choose the one Richelieu preferred, yet feel it was entirely his own decision. The wisest professionals understand this dynamic intuitively. They know the difference between presenting complete solutions and offering thoughtful suggestions that allow superiors to contribute and expand. They make proposals in ways that credit their leaders' previous guidance, even when developing entirely new approaches. Consider how they might frame a revolutionary idea. Your emphasis on customer experience last quarter got me thinking about how we might extend that principle to our digital interface. This approach honors the superior's past contributions while creating space for new thinking. The difference lies not in withholding capability, but in the art of presentation. It manifests in knowing when to ask questions rather than provide answers, when to offer frameworks rather than conclusions, when to create collaborative spaces where authority figures can meaningfully contribute. The most adept practitioners of this principle understand that power often needs reassurance, not from obsequiousness or artificial deference, but from genuine acknowledgement of its legitimate value and perspective. Those who master this principle recognize that human hierarchies, whether formal or informal, are sustained as much by emotional exchange as by organizational structure. Every interaction either reinforces or undermines the psychological contract that keeps these hierarchies stable. When we understand this, we can choose our moments of brilliance strategically, ensuring they strengthen rather than strain the relationships we depend upon for growth and advancement. The principle extends beyond formal workplace structures into every realm where influence operates. Parents respond more openly to children's ideas when they feel their parental wisdom is valued. Community leaders embrace new initiatives more readily when they feel their experience is respected. Even among peers, receptivity to new thinking correlates strongly with whether that thinking affirms or diminishes the listener's sense of value and contribution. This understanding reveals something profound about power. It is rarely as secure as it appears. Those in positions of authority often harbor deeper insecurities precisely because of their visibility and responsibility. Their resistance to being outshone stems not from petty ego, but from the legitimate concern that their perceived value to the organization, to the community, or to the relationship might be diminished. By understanding this vulnerability, one can address it with compassion rather than frustration. The true artistry in applying this principle lies in finding the balance between false subservience and unfiltered brilliance. Neither extreme serves the greater good. To diminish one's talents completely is to deprive the world of genuine contribution. To display them without awareness of their impact is to create unnecessary resistance. The middle path, channeling talents in ways that elevate rather than diminish others, creates the most fertile ground for influence. Interestingly, this principle operates differently across cultures. In some societies, hierarchies are more explicit, and the rules for navigating them more clearly defined. In others, the dynamics are more fluid, with informal influence sometimes mattering more than formal position. Yet, across these variations, the psychological substrate remains remarkably consistent. Those who help others feel valuable, competent, and wise tend to advance further than those who prioritize displaying their own capabilities. History offers countless examples of those who ignored this principle to their detriment. Thomas Cromwell, despite his extraordinary service to Henry VIII, eventually overreached and made the king feel manipulated rather than empowered. Marie Antoinette's lady-in-waiting, the Princesse de Lamballe, maintained her position through unwavering support of the Queen's sense of dignity, while those who attempted to outshine the royal couple found themselves quickly marginalized. What makes this principle particularly challenging in contemporary Western culture is our simultaneous veneration of both hierarchy and independence. We are told to respect authority while being authentic, to work within systems while disrupting them, to follow processes while thinking outside the box. These contradictory messages create confusion about when to shine and when to step back, when to challenge and when to support. The resolution to this confusion lies not in rigid rules, but in heightened awareness, paying careful attention to how one's contributions affect the emotional landscape of power. This requires a kind of emotional intelligence that goes beyond recognizing one's own feelings to understanding the complex dynamics of status, belonging, and validation that operate in any group. The application of this principle varies with context. In settings where innovation is explicitly valued, the boundaries of outshining may be more expansive. In more traditional hierarchies, the same behavior might be perceived as threatening. The wise practitioner reads the specific culture, adapting their approach accordingly while maintaining awareness of the universal human need to feel valued and competent. Ultimately, understanding when and how to shine is not about manipulation, but about empathy. It's about recognizing that everyone, regardless of position, needs to feel that their contributions matter, that their presence adds value, that their guidance makes a difference. When we honor this need in others, especially those above us in formal hierarchies, we create the conditions for our own gifts to be not just tolerated, but celebrated. The true mastery of this principle comes when it is applied not from calculation, but from genuine appreciation for what authority figures do contribute. Most bring something valuable to their position: experience, perspective, connections, institutional knowledge. Even if their technical skills or creative thinking may not match our own. By sincerely acknowledging these contributions, we create authentic rather than manufactured opportunities for them to feel secure in their position. Perhaps the deepest insight offered by this principle is how it reveals the fundamentally relational nature of power. Power never exists in isolation, but always within a web of human connections and perceptions. By understanding these connections, their strengths, vulnerabilities, and needs, we navigate them more successfully, advancing not through dominance, but through the more sustainable path of mutual elevation. The principle of never outshining the master, then, reveals itself not as a cynical strategy, but as a profound recognition of human nature. It acknowledges that the path to influence lies not in brilliant isolation, but in psychological connection, not in diminishing oneself, but in finding ways to shine that illuminate rather than overshadow others. In this recognition lies the seed of a more sophisticated and ultimately more humane approach to the navigation of power. The difference is subtle, but profound. This approach isn't dishonest or manipulative. It's simply acknowledging a fundamental truth about human psychology. Everyone needs to feel valued, especially those whose identity is tied to their expertise or authority. This reality touches on the deepest aspects of human nature. Our need for recognition transcends culture, position, and time. Those in positions of power often have more fragile egos precisely because so much of their self-concept is invested in their perceived mastery. Their authority becomes integrated with their identity, creating a vulnerability that, when threatened, triggers defensive responses that appear irrational to outside observers. This psychological mechanism operates beneath conscious awareness, making it all the more powerful. Consider how organizational psychologists have documented that leaders' resistance to ideas often correlates not with the quality of those ideas, but with perceived threats to their status. The brain processes status threats in the same regions that process physical pain, explaining why seemingly rational people might reject brilliant proposals for seemingly irrational reasons. This isn't weakness. It's human nature operating exactly as it has evolved to function in social hierarchies. Have you experienced this in your own life? perhaps with a superior who seemed to resist your most brilliant ideas, only to embrace similar ones when they appeared to come from elsewhere. Or authority figures who responded more positively when you asked questions that highlighted their knowledge rather than demonstrating your own. These experiences reveal the invisible choreography of influence, the unwritten rules that govern how ideas move through hierarchies. Notice how the same concept, presented differently, meets entirely different fates. A subordinate announces, "I've developed a revolutionary approach that will increase efficiency by 30%, and faces skepticism. Yet when reframed as, "Your strategic direction got me thinking about a way we might extend those principles to increase efficiency," the identical proposal finds receptive ground. This dynamic appears across cultures, though its expression varies. In some East Asian business contexts, the principle of face makes this dynamic explicit. Preserving the dignity and status of superiors is openly acknowledged as essential. Western organizations often maintain the fiction of pure meritocracy while still operating on these same psychological principles, creating confusion for those who take the meritocratic ideal at face value. The wisdom in "never outshine the master" isn't about diminishing oneself or hiding talents. It's about understanding that true influence often requires patience and psychological insight. This principle finds expression throughout history. Ancient Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu advised generals to attribute victories to their emperor rather than claiming personal glory. Renaissance courtiers mastered the art of making patrons feel responsible for their protégés' best ideas. Even Benjamin Franklin noted how, when seeking influence with rivals, he would ask to borrow rare books from their libraries, allowing them to feel superior in their generosity and knowledge rather than challenged by his. These historical examples reveal something timeless about influence. It flows through relationships, not merely through ideas. The quality of a concept matters far less than the quality of the relationship through which it's transmitted. By attending to the relationship dynamic first, one creates the conditions where ideas can move freely. A different approach can transform relationships. Instead of presenting fully formed solutions, one might share thoughtful questions. Rather than demonstrating mastery, create spaces for others to showcase theirs. Find ways to attribute insights to a superior's guidance even when they originate elsewhere. This approach acknowledges the power of collaborative creation. By presenting fragments rather than finished work, space is open for others to contribute meaningfully. This satisfies both the psychological need for validation and the practical benefit of diverse input. A question often achieves what a declaration cannot. It invites rather than imposes, creates dialogue rather than monologue. Consider the Socratic method, not as typically taught, but as Socrates himself practiced it. His questions seem to genuinely seek wisdom rather than lead to predetermined conclusions. This created space for his interlocutors to feel they were participating in discovery rather than being lectured. Modern leaders who master this approach find their teams naturally gravitate toward the very solutions the leader might have initially proposed, but with greater commitment precisely because they feel ownership. The results can be remarkable. When authority figures feel secure in their position rather than threatened by brilliance below them, they often become the greatest advocates for that very brilliance. They showcase the work of their subordinates not as a challenge to their authority, but as evidence of their excellent leadership and mentoring. This transformation can be witnessed in numerous organizational success stories. A senior partner at a consulting firm repeatedly blocked an associate's innovative methodology until that associate reframed it as an extension of the partner's earlier work. Once repositioned as building upon rather than replacing the partner's contribution, the senior partner became the methodology's champion, promoting it throughout the organization and ensuring its adoption far more effectively than the associate could have alone. This pattern demonstrates that resistance often stems not from the content of ideas, but from their relational implications. When brilliance threatens, it faces barriers. When it affirms, it finds support. The wise understand that the fastest path to implementation often involves sharing credit liberally, especially upward. This shift requires something profound, a confrontation with one's own ego. In quiet moments, the difficult questions must be asked. Why is recognition so important? What is there to prove, and to whom? Does the need to be seen as the brightest person in the room serve ultimate goals? This self-examination touches on existential questions of worth and validation. Many high achievers build identities around intellectual recognition, being the smartest, the most innovative, the one with answers. This pattern often originates in childhood experiences where praise came primarily for intellectual achievement rather than other human qualities. Breaking this pattern requires acknowledging that worth exists independently of recognition. Psychologists who study ego development note that mature individuals distinguish between having good ideas and needing to be seen as having good ideas. This maturity allows for strategic choices about when and how to present contributions. It creates freedom to prioritize outcomes over attribution, impact over acknowledgement. This is where the true challenge lies for many. Modern culture celebrates individual achievement, encouraging everyone to shine bright and stand out. Yet the most enduring form of power often comes from helping others feel good about themselves. The contradiction runs deep in contemporary society. Education systems reward individual performance. Social media celebrates personal branding. Organizations promote star performers. These systems create powerful incentives for visibility. Yet paradoxically, the most effective influencers often operate with subtle indirection, understanding that helping others feel valued creates more lasting impact than demanding personal recognition. Consider how the most respected advisors throughout history operated not by demanding acknowledgement of their wisdom, but by helping their benefactors feel wise. From Aristotle tutoring Alexander to modern executive coaches guiding CEOs, the pattern persists. Creating space for others to feel their own competence generates more lasting influence than displaying superior knowledge. The wisdom is ancient, but the application timeless. In boardrooms and classrooms, in relationships both professional and personal, there is a constant navigation of the delicate balance between demonstrating value and making others feel valued. This balance varies across contexts. In some settings, creative collaborations, research partnerships, mentor-mentee relationships, mutual acknowledgement of complementary strengths creates psychological safety for all parties. In more hierarchical environments, greater attention to status dynamics may be necessary. The skillful practitioner reads these contextual cues, adapting their approach without compromising their integrity. Anthropologists note that in every human community, from hunter-gatherer bands to multinational corporations, informal influence networks operate alongside formal hierarchies. Those with the greatest impact often aren't those with the most impressive titles or the most vocal presence, but those who understand how to make others feel heard, respected, and valuable. When encountering the dark emotions of others, their insecurity, fear, or need to assert dominance, one can either react from personal darkness or respond from a place of understanding. There is a choice to see their behavior not as a rejection of light, but as an expression of their own unaddressed shadows. This perspective requires psychological maturity, the ability to witness defensive behavior without taking it personally. When a superior dismisses an idea hastily or claims credit inappropriately, the natural response is resentment. Yet beneath these behaviors typically lies not malice, but vulnerability. The fear of irrelevance, of being surpassed, of losing hard-won status. By recognizing these fears, one can respond to the underlying need rather than the surface behavior. This doesn't mean accepting mistreatment, but rather addressing the psychological dynamic at its root. I've been thinking about how your approach to the Wilson account could be extended to these new clients, accomplishes more than, "My new strategy is better than what we've been doing." This is where self-knowledge becomes crucial. Only by understanding personal needs for validation and fears of inadequacy can one navigate the complex emotional landscapes of power dynamics. When these patterns are recognized internally, they can be identified in others without judgment. This self-knowledge emerges through reflection, often catalyzed by moments of frustration when others seem irrationally resistant to worthy ideas. In these moments of tension, internal questions prove valuable. Why does this lack of recognition bother me so deeply? What story am I telling myself about what this means about my value? What childhood patterns might be reactivating here? Philosophers from Socrates, "Know thyself," to modern existentialists, have emphasized self-awareness as the foundation of authentic interaction with others. When we understand our own psychological drivers, especially our needs for validation, control, and security, we become less reactive to others' defensive behaviors and more strategic in our responses. The paradox of power is that true influence often comes not from outshining others, but from helping them shine. By making masters, whether bosses, clients, or partners, feel brilliantly secure rather than insecurely threatened, an environment is created where everyone can eventually thrive. This paradox reveals itself across domains. In therapy, the most effective practitioners help clients discover their own insights rather than displaying superior understanding. In education, the most impactful teachers create conditions for students to experience the thrill of discovery rather than merely demonstrating their own knowledge. In parenting, the wisest guide children towards self-discovered solutions rather than imposing answers. These examples share a common thread. The most profound influence comes not from directing others, but from creating conditions where they can access their own wisdom and feel their own competence. This principle extends naturally to organizational leadership, where the most effective leaders focus less on being the source of answers and more on creating environments where collective intelligence emerges. Look around your own life. Where are you trying to outshine others? Where might your brilliance be creating resistance rather than receptivity? What would change if you focused less on being recognized and more on making others feel recognized? These questions invite practical application. Consider recent interactions where ideas weren't received as expected. Rather than focusing on the content of those ideas, examine the relational dynamic. How was the idea presented? What might the other person have been feeling? Was there space created for them to contribute meaningfully, or were they positioned as merely an audience for brilliance? Now imagine rewinding those interactions with a different approach, one that prioritizes the relationship over the idea itself. How might the conversation unfold differently if it began with sincere inquiry into the other's perspective? What if attribution were offered generously up front? What if fragments rather than complete solutions were shared? The ultimate wisdom may be this: the most powerful person in any room is often not the one with the most impressive display of talent, but the one who makes others feel talented. Not the one who knows the most, but the one who creates space for others to share what they know. This insight has been verified repeatedly in organizational research. Studies of team effectiveness consistently find that psychological safety, The feeling that one's contributions will be valued rather than criticized predicts performance more reliably than individual brilliance. Groups where members feel their intelligence and capability are recognized consistently outperform groups with objectively higher individual talents but lower mutual appreciation. Ancient wisdom traditions often emphasize this principle. Lao Tzu noted that the best leader is one whose people say, "We did it ourselves." Confucius emphasized that the superior person elevates others rather than elevating themselves. These philosophical traditions recognized millennia ago what modern organizational psychology continues to validate, that human systems function best when participants feel personally valued and competent. The journey doesn't require diminishing one's light. Instead, it's about learning to shine that light in ways that illuminate others. Career advancement and personal growth come not through desperate assertion of brilliance, but through growing wisdom about human nature and the ability to help others feel secure in their own power. This reframing transforms how we understand competence itself. Beyond technical skill or knowledge lies relational skill, the ability to create conditions where multiple intelligences can contribute optimally. This capacity to orchestrate rather than dominate, to conduct rather than perform solo, represents a higher order competence that ultimately creates more value than individual brilliance alone. Consider how symphony conductors operate. They may not play any instrument as well as the specialists before them, yet their ability to bring forth the best from each musician creates something no individual virtuoso could achieve alone. This metaphor extends to every domain where complex collaboration occurs. The ability to help others perform at their best becomes the meta-skill that surpasses individual excellence. The next time you find yourself eager to display your talents, to correct someone in authority, or to ensure everyone knows just how bright you are, pause. Ask yourself, what is the true goal? To be seen as brilliant? Or to create the kind of relationship where contributions can have lasting impact? This momentary reflection creates space for strategic choice rather than reactive display. It allows for considering the longer game, building influence over time through relationships of mutual respect rather than seeking immediate validation through impressive demonstrations. It invites consideration of ultimate objectives rather than immediate emotional satisfaction. The question changes from, how can I show what I know? To, how can I create conditions where my knowledge can be most effectively received and utilized? This shift of focus, from performance to impact, transforms not just how ideas are presented, but also how they're developed. Ideas crafted with their reception in mind naturally evolve to connect more effectively with existing frameworks, to acknowledge contributions of others, to leave space for collaborative enhancement. The ancient wisdom remains: never outshine the master. Not because you should hide your light, but because the deepest form of brightness comes from illuminating others. In that illumination, you may find that your own path toward growth and influence becomes clearer than you ever imagined. This principle invites reflection on the true nature of power and influence in human systems. The conventional understanding sees power as zero-sum. My gain is your loss. My brilliance diminishes yours. Yet deeper examination reveals that the most profound forms of influence operate differently, creating expanding rather than competing spheres of competence and recognition. When we help others feel their capability, they become more capable. When we create space for others' contributions, those contributions often exceed what would have emerged in competitive environments. When we focus on collective illumination rather than individual spotlight, we create conditions for sustainable rather than temporary influence. Always make those above you feel comfortably superior. In your desire to please or impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talent, or you might accomplish the opposite: inspire fear and insecurity. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the heights of power. This wisdom, when fully understood, transcends mere tactical advantage. It speaks to the paradoxical nature of human relations, that we influence most effectively not by dominating, but by connecting, not by outshining, but by illuminating. In honoring the fundamental human need for validation and recognition, we create the foundation for the most meaningful forms of contribution and the most enduring kinds of impact. The mastery of this principle represents not manipulation, but maturity, the capacity to set aside immediate gratification of the ego for more meaningful forms of influence. It embodies the wisdom of recognizing that our greatest impact often comes not from being the brightest light in the room, but from being the light that enables others to shine. And that's a wrap for today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time.